Hello, everybody. My name is Tony Heil with ALS United Mid-Atlantic, and this is our Goals podcast. We've been doing this podcast for a few months now, and if you've listened to past episodes, you know that we've talked with people from a variety of perspectives when it comes to ALS, from researchers to people living with ALS, caregivers, and staff here at ALS United Mid-Atlantic to talk about topics like mindfulness and genetic research. And today we're going to be talking about genetics again, but in a different way. Because right now, ALS United Mid-Atlantic is working with many other disease organizations, from ALS to other diseases, to collaborate and help guide medical research in general. This is such an important time in 2025 to fight for more funding for medical research, to support research at all levels, to support NIH in general. And we know that it's not just a competition for dollars, but a collaboration, because what we learn from one disease will help the other. I talked about this in my podcast with Dr. Grogan and Dr. Geronimo, which you can see on our variety of channels, about my grandmother having Parkinson's disease and what we learned from that from brain-computer interface today. And today, I'm excited to talk with my friend Lauren Holder. She lives in North Carolina, and she is with Help for HD for Huntington's disease. She has a deeply personal story to talk about when it comes to Huntington's disease. We have a lot that we can share that connects us, much more that connects us and divides us when it comes to our work, and really nothing that divides us aside from some state borders. And we're going to talk about how we can work together to support everybody and get more money for medical research, more awareness, more participation, and support both diseases at the same time. So, Lauren, thanks for talking today.
Thanks so much for having me.
And before I start, because I don't want to wait until the end, you have your own podcast. That's kind of how I reach out to you. So plug your podcast from the beginning so that people know how to follow you for that.
Yes, thank you. So my podcast is Help for HD Live through Help for HD International. It is a podcast I've been producing since 2018. But I was actually the first person on the podcast before I ever did it, produced and hosted it, before it was a nonprofit, actually. I was the first person on there. So it is a podcast that focuses on support and resources for Huntington's disease globally. We've had over 160,000 listeners worldwide, and we do everything from stories from people in the community to research and regulatory and everything.
And so tell me about your story. I've been reading it. Hopefully, if others find this, they might find more details by searching you and going to your website. But just an overview, about your personal connection with HD.
Yeah. So I am gene positive for HD, which means that I will 100% get it, because Huntington's disease is a genetic neurological disorder, progressive. It's 100% genetic. And we have what's called a CAG score that we go off of through a blood test. And if you have a count over 40, then you are going to develop symptoms at some point in your life. My count is 43. For HD, we have no cure, and the only treatments we have available right now are symptomatic treatments. There are no disease-modifying treatments available. So I know that I have it. I have actually started showing symptoms. I'm in what you would call the prodromal stage of HD. I have cognitive and behavioral symptoms, but no movements. And I was a caregiver for my father for several years and legal guardian, and he passed away in January of 2021 from HD. And I've been an advocate ever since I tested at the age of 20. I'm 39 now. So long-standing history of just being an advocate in the space and trying to make things better and provide quality of life.
You tested way back then, and so what was your first sign in your family? Because you said your father and others had the gene as well. Is it a number of people that have had that gene?
Yeah, so my grandfather was the first one that we knew of. When I was 15 years old, he was tested after the VA saw movements and everything, and so they decided to go ahead and test him, and he was tested and diagnosed with HD. He was very symptomatic at the time. But that kind of started my journey. I had no idea what HD was. And being the person that I am, I started researching everything that I absolutely could about it. Even did my senior thesis on it. And it really became a huge part of my life. I got married young, and I was actually 19. And my dad started showing symptoms in his late 40s. Um, I saw some things that were bothering me, but I decided when I was 20 to go ahead and test. So at that time, my grandfather was the only one who had tested. My dad had not. And I decided I wanted to go through genetic testing myself when I was 20. And so I had to basically, I had to get a court order for my grandfather's genetic results in order to get my genetic test done because my dad had not tested. Um, and as far as the rest of my family members, they either chose not to test, or I have one aunt who tested negative, but she was the only other person to test. And, obviously now we know more about my family, and we know that like my great grandmother had HD, but we didn't have a clue then when I was 15.
And we've been talking through the Cures Collective that's been pulling together disease organizations to talk about uh, medical funding, research funding, etc. And I know from my friends who are advocates in the HD space. My friend Carl is very active in it in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. So when I talked with them, they said that there are a number of symptoms that are similar between ALS and HD. And I know that some people they think it's one or the other, or maybe that they're worried about one symptom. Have you, because you've been talking about this for a long time in your life, do you know that there are people with HD who their symptoms are similar to either ALS or other diseases?
Yes, I mean, a lot of times the way that we have to describe HD, because nobody knows what it is basically having Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and ALS simultaneously, and I think out of all three, it's probably closest to ALS. I would say the biggest difference is ALS goes faster. And we do have chorea. We don't have the tremors or whatever, but we have chorea, jerky movements, and balance issues as you get further along into the disease. But starting out in the cognitive and behavioral symptoms is very similar. And instead of this long-term memory loss, it's more short-term memory loss, um, executive function decline, memory problems, really just a slowing down of everything is kind of how it feels. It's really just feels like everything is starting to slow down and harder to process. But as far as further in the disease, we have everything from, the jerky movements. Some people don't have jerky movements. They become very stiff and have dystonia. And so it's the opposite, right? Like they just are unable to move, which is what my dad suffered from. He didn't really have a lot of movement other than balance issues. So we have just a huge range that some are very similar to ALS.
And you've been an advocate for this for a long time. Like you said, you started out when you were 20, doing your own personal advocacy, your own podcast, which I encourage people to listen to. But your original perspective was from your family. Were there a lot of things that you learned early on about the diversity of the disease and other people's experiences with it?
I would say when I was first getting into it, the disease was really just looked at as a movement disorder.
Mm.
And still to this day, that's what we're told, right? When we go to a neurologist, we're going to a movement disorder specialist. And unfortunately, that does a disservice to anybody who is early on in the disease, who's suffering from behavioral and cognitive symptoms, because this disease is so much more than movement. And, now research has shown us and has proven that this disease shows up decades before movements, and we have cognitive and behavioral symptoms decades before movements. The brain imaging shows damage to the brain decades before movements show up. And so to be classified as just a movement disorder is kind of disservice to anybody early on. But we're seeing that change, right? Like that's something in the last 5 to 10 years, we start seeing where there's this shift as those of us who are noticing these changes and who are speaking out about the disease are trying to shift that mindset. And one of the leaders in that was ALS. And to have, I can't say enough good things about the ALS movement because it truly provided other rare diseases this opportunity to say we can speak up, we can say things are different, and it works. And it also has been wonderful to be able to collaborate with other disease groups and know that by having a larger voice and us not being the only ones experiencing those things, earlier on in disease and genetic side of things, um, because we're working together, we can hit more things and really make a difference because we're louder. So I would say initially it wasn't as diverse. And, it was just this very set mindset of this is a movement disorder disease. Don't even bother going until you have movements. Don't do anything. It's death sentence. There's nothing that you can do. Just live your life. And then when you get movements, you're screwed. And we have seen a huge shift in our community in the mindset, definitely over the past 5 years, where, we're trying to live with HD and really change how we see things.
So you've seen a shift in the movement, and you've been involved for a long time. Have you been using your voice to encourage people to kind of shift that conversation? Because I know you have seen the power of telling your story. Have you been doing that yourself, telling others, you know, just get out there and encouraging them in a way that's fair and comfortable? Because I know you don't want to force someone into the limelight if they're not ready, but I imagine that's a lot of what you've done is try to empower those people with HD.
Absolutely, and it's one of the reasons with my podcast I started a whole HD Uncut series was for the purpose of allowing people to come on and share their voice in whatever the way they wanted to. I also have been a huge advocate when it comes to regulatory, and so we recently had a PFDD meeting, which is with FDA, patient-focused drug discovery meeting, where we got to sit down with FDA. And one of the things that I said before I went to go speak in person was, give me your stories. If you can't share them, but you're okay with me sharing them, then I'm happy to do it, because it's one thing for me to share my story, but it's a whole other thing for people to see all and hear all these other stories and know it's just not one person speaking up and speaking out. And so that has been a huge passion for me, is to be able to give a voice to HD.
And speaking of people who have a big story for their disease, recently actor Eric Dane came out about his diagnosis of ALS. He was on the show Grey's Anatomy and other TV shows. And as I'm watching his conversation on television about his ALS diagnosis, from my experience, not as a doctor or nurse, I can recognize the symptoms that Eric Dane has. I see certain things that are a hallmark of ALS, and I'm not going to speak about those things. It's not my place to say about his disease, or I'm not going to share what I know because I'm not his doctor, but I recognize a lot of those symptoms. Now, when you see people with HD, whether it's someone famous or just in a group, do you recognize things pretty early and like, oh, that's a sign, that's a sign? Maybe no one else knows, but Lauren Holder knows.
100%. I do. And even in myself, there's an awareness there for myself in seeing things um, that I don't think that I would have had I not been in this space for as long as I have been in this space, and in the research side of things, especially. But yes, if I watch a show or I see somebody who's famous who has something, I tend to notice those things. But what's even more interesting is it gives you an appreciation for other neurodegenerative diseases. So even when I was working at the hospital, and I was working closely with public safety at the time, and I remember this guy came in from off the street. He came in and they immediately thought drug seeking or alcohol or something because of his movements. And I said, no, he's got a neurologic condition. You guys need to treat this differently. And it's things like that, even where you get hyper aware. And so it helps with other things like that in your life, to know not everything is always what we seem to think it is.
I'm glad you said that you are aware of your own symptoms because you advocate for yourself, and not everyone's always great at that. It reminds me of my friend Gary. His wife Paula had ALS, and she had a genetic form of ALS, so she knew it was in her family, and her doctor did not diagnose her as quickly as he should have. And she went to a couple different doctors before she was diagnosed, and the doctor didn't believe what she had was ALS for whatever reason. And Gary still remembers the notes in the doctor's meetings of not taking her seriously. And I think that's a big problem still to this day, is about how women are not taken as seriously when they talk about their own symptoms. You're a woman with involved in HD. Have you seen that as well? That you know your body, you know what these symptoms are, you know the disease, and sometimes you have to advocate to a medical professional of, hey, you need to listen to me because this time I know what I'm talking about.
Every time, yes. I have personally experienced those issues. I recently, actually in 2022, went to have neurocognitive testing done. And in the neurocognitive testing, I had a baseline done when I was 29. So in 2022, when I was having issues and was terminated from work for work performance issues, I went ahead and had neurocognitive testing done again to compare to my baseline to see if I was having deficits, which they found. So they diagnosed me with neurocognitive disorder related to HD. And following that visit, I went to the neurologist, who is supposed to be an HD doctor. But when I came in, they said, well, you don't have movements. There's no point in you being here. And at this point, I've had a lot of experience in the HD space. That is not an appropriate answer to me. And so I personally made the decision that I would not go back to that doctor. And I set one of my friends who is with a nonprofit organization called HD Reach to go and speak with them to educate them more on HD and the appropriate things to say now, as well as just there were other things that happened in that visit that they didn't give good information. And so, that's where we have to really educate as advocates. And so I sent a friend to them, and now I literally fly out of state to see an expert I trust because of that issue. Because if I go to somebody here who, doesn't know me and doesn't support me, I'm having to fight every single time. And I had to do it with my dad, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting to be in that space where you're having to prove yourself over and over when this is supposed to be somebody supporting you and providing you with resources and helping you along in the journey.
It's exhausting enough just having to deal with the realities of this disease. I mean, life itself is exhausting. So
Yep,
that's just an added thing. And we know from our own research in ALS how stress levels impact your own health, both as a person with
100%.
ALS as for caregivers. And that just adds to stress, I'm sure. And it would be interesting to see future research into what that kind of discrimination or lack of respect leads to in terms of
Absolutely.
people's health.
Absolutely. I would love to see research into it because I agree. I feel like it really contributes to um, mental health decline and you know when you don't have resources and support and you're trying to have a quality of life, it's very hard.
And it's so easy to neglect your own symptoms sometimes. I know many
Mhm.
people with ALS who they have a foot drop or they have a little bit of weakness in their arm, and they'll say, well, it's probably something else. They'll continue to work out. It's pretty normal. It's not a criticism. I would do the same thing probably. But if a doctor then minimizes those symptoms,
Yes,
then you're likely to just not think about it. And then it's months later, and a later diagnosis means you're not getting other resources you could get.
absolutely. Absolutely. And, even in HD, even though that's the norm of telling us, there's nothing for you and there's no point in you coming unless you have movements, there are still things we could do mental health wise. We could be going to psychiatrists and have mental health resources available to us. We are dealing with a huge mental health crisis in our community. Um, when it comes to the cognitive symptoms, we could be going for baseline neurocognitive testing and regular follow up a norm, and it's not right now. Um,
Mhm.
and there are other resources that we could have available to us if we were looking at this disease earlier on and getting the support we needed versus right now, where, I'm sorry, telling us death sentence and just wait for movements is just not a quality of life.
Right, and I know a lot of people with ALS who years past were told similar things, and now we have new treatments, and that more people are getting involved in research. And so, speaking of research, you're a big advocate for research in general, especially for Huntington's. So, have you seen certain things that either give you hope in the research space, or certain avenues of research where, like, this is where we should be looking, or now you understand it better? Because I know I've learned a lot on ALS, so what are some aspects of research that have excited you or given you hope?
There's a lot right now. So we actually have several different pharmaceutical companies working in this space. We have PTC Therapeutics is probably on the top of my list because it's a pill, disease modifying pill that has the data has been very good in Europe, and now they're going to be doing phase 3 in the US. So I'm really looking forward to that becoming available in the US. Um, and we also have a gene therapy on the table that will be the first gene therapy for HD. It is being it is with Unicure, and they are working very hard to get it to us as soon as possible. They're working very closely with the FDA, and so that is super exciting because they have years of data on that has shown to slow progression of the disease. And so, yeah, I think we have a lot to look forward to. They're not the only ones. We've got Spark Therapeutics and Roche and Perlenia, Teva. All of those are in the space right now working for us and alongside us to work on disease modifying therapies or symptomatic treatments to help things for us.
We just saw a new gene therapy for ALS that was approved, tofersen or Kasaldi, and from what I've seen and heard from our physicians and from those who have been using it, it's been a game changer for those with the SOD1 gene mutation, which is only a small percentage of people with ALS. But I've known a number of people who had that gene mutation, and if this therapy had been around 10 years ago, that would have been amazing. So many other people could have used it. But I know that those people who had the SOD1 mutation contributed to research, which could have led to this treatment. So when you see advances like this new therapy for ALS, does that give you excitement and hope? Like, if we can do it for something like that, what can we do here?
Yes, we keep up for those of us who are research nerds like myself and patient advocates. Yes, we keep up with anything that's going on in other disease groups, specifically neurodegenerative diseases, to see, one, is this something that would work in HD, or there was a trial like Sage Therapeutics that was being done in both HD and ALS or Alzheimer's, and it's things like that. When you have a larger group of participants, it can be done faster, it's more accurate. Those are things that we could absolutely be collaborating with, is getting these larger participation groups through just collaborating and having more than one disease group with pharma. And they're willing to do it because a lot of times they'll start in one and then they'll go to the next. So a lot of times, we'll see them start in HD and then we'll see them put something out for ALS, and the same goes. And so, yeah, we follow everything that's going on research wise with whether it's ALS or another neurodegenerative disease.
Yeah, I was talking on our recent podcast with Dr. Zarnescu from Penn State Health Hershey Medical Center. She's doing a lot of great research on ALS and using fruit flies. And the hall down the hall from her, the lab down the hall, is working on Parkinson's disease. It's not
Yep.
like it's in another zip code, even. It's just in the same center. They're working on Parkinson's disease, and those people talk to each other just like I talk to people in the office or just talk to my neighbors. It's not like they don't meet. And a lot of the people who end up having one job doing some genetic research or other kind of background in one disease, they go to the other disease because they see something of interest.
Yeah, we have a lot of younger investigators, a lot of people who are getting into research and science, and they're directly affected by HD, whether they're still at risk, gene negative, gene positive, but they're getting into that space because they wanted to make a difference. And yes, they are branching out to the other disease groups as well, because a lot of times it's either too much to handle, like HD all the time, and so better to help in one area and then be able to go back and forth if they need to. or they're looking for things, that ALS has done and has helped, and can we look at how we do it in HD? And so I think that's really cool right now to see those younger people going into that space and really branching out.
Now, one thing that those younger people and those researchers are also impacted by is funding, particularly federal funding, NIH funding. And we are both advocating for more funding for NIH in general. It's a serious time right now with potential or likely cuts to NIH at the federal level, the National Institutes of Health, which has funded the best research in the world here in the United States. And I know that's how we met, is talking about that kind of issue. I know a lot of our researchers are worried about losing some of their younger researchers because of not having the funding for them. So, why should people be advocating for funding for NIH and other federal dollars towards research right now?
Well, we should be advocating, as you said, we're faced with cuts and everything like that. A lot of times, if you're not advocating, if you are not a strong voice when it comes to FDA, if they're not seeing that you have an interest and that you want something done, they're not going to do it. So if you're not sitting there saying, okay, we're dealing with this issue, they think you don't have a concern about it. And so they're not going to put their attention on it. However, if they see that you've got a community who is stepping up and saying, we need this, we're desperate, they're going to listen to that. And then if you partner with and collaborate with other disease groups and say, we're all dealing with this issue and we need funding because we're not getting it and we're suffering and people are dying and these are your constituents and these are people you need to focus on at a larger level, it hits differently as well. So it's so important to be an advocate in that space, to be speaking to regulatory. And I don't necessarily mean you have to go to FDA and speak in person. I'm just saying, even sharing your voice in a letter, even sharing your story and saying, can you take this for me? Like, those are things that you can do that matter, because every single person counts when we're going to them and saying, these are the people affected. These are the way that they're affected. And we need to have those voices, because otherwise they think that we have no interest in having treatments and cures and no interest in that funding.
Yeah, exactly. 110%. And that's true for everything. I had someone say recently, like, oh, I think I've reached out to my legislators a lot, or ALS has, because there's different groups. And are you sure we're not going to start annoying them? I said, if they feel like they're hearing from you too much, is when they're finally starting to hear from you enough. Like, you
Yes.
want them to have you top of mind. They're thinking about you because there's so many other things on their mind, from regulating AI to Iran to whatever news issues happening that day. So you need to do something that's going to make sure that they don't forget about you, or and move on to the next topic.
Right. And it doesn't mean that you have to be annoying. You can do things in a respectful way to do those reminders. And I worked very closely with HDSA at one point for the HD Parity Act, and I was going to DC probably twice a year at that point. And this was way before kids. But you know, that's exactly it. Like, they're not going to pay attention if I'm not following up, or if I'm rude about it, they're not paying you, like, they're going to just completely shut you out. But if you go and say, look, this is really important, I really need, and you keep at it and you keep reminding them, because you're right, they're extremely busy dealing with all kinds of issues, all kinds of diseases, all kinds of everything. They're dealing with all constituents. And so the reminder is not a problem. They don't care about the reminder, but it's more of working with them and really providing that type of mentality of, I'm not doing this to annoy you. I'm not doing this to be rude. I'm doing this because it's really important and I want to work with you to make it better.
Definitely. And I think that a lot of these groups would rather hear from us than from a lot of other people they hear from. Like, I know in
Absolutely.
the political realm, they hear from a lot of people who are less than nice. So hearing from
Yes.
groups and causes that are nicer, they'd rather talk to us than a lot of other things that they have to talk with. That's for sure.
Oh, for sure. Especially when it comes to disease groups. Like, for them, they want to help. That, those are where funds matter to them. Everybody is affected by something, right? And so,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to something like, Alzheimer's, everybody knows somebody with Alzheimer's. And And so people can relate a lot of the time. And so, yeah, they're going to think about, I can help with this. This is something like a disease. And they're not going to, they don't judge so much when it comes from disease groups, especially when they're, family members and people who are actually dealing with it.
Right. And I know we all come up at advocacy from different political backgrounds, and some people think, oh, only Democrats care about this, or only Republicans care about this, or none of them do. But really, one, it doesn't matter the party. They want to meet with disease groups. That's something that they all have a connection to. And you would be surprised by the people across the ideological spectrum who are interested in this kind of thing. Sometimes you'll see legislation for ALS or for HD maybe that has the most liberal and the most conservative person on board with it. We just got a legislation passed in Pennsylvania for brain research, and the vote was 197 to 5 in the state house. So you can't get that many politicians agreeing on pizza toppings, much less
No.
any other political topic. So there's a lot more agreement than disagreement sometimes on things like this.
Absolutely. My experience has been there's a lot of bipartisanship because the diseases don't discriminate, right? It doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, anything. You're dealing with a disease. And so, yes, my experience has been there's been a lot of support on both sides to get things done.
So you mentioned reminders, and let's finish with one other important reminder, and that is again how people can learn more about you and your work. You have your podcast, you have other work you do with HD. So let's finish up by sharing that again, so if people are listening to this whole thing and they want to be in touch and learn more what they should do.
Absolutely. Thank you. So you can find the podcast actually on, we're on Spreaker is our main show pages, but we are on Spotify, iHeart, iTunes, Google Podcast. You can type in help the number 4 HD live and it will come up, or help the number 4 in HD. It should come up. On any of those platforms, as well as social media. We have a Facebook group, we have Instagram, we have TikTok. You can find me on any of those. I also have a YouTube channel that is my personal YouTube channel that is separate from the podcast. So if you go to YouTube, I am under Dying to Live. And I am trying to post regularly on there, and a lot of it focuses on my advocacy work and interviews that I'm doing for collaborating in rare disease. So I am trying to update there regularly, aside from just the podcast. And yeah, I mean, I'm doing a lot of other things in the HD space as well as, just rare disease. So I would say best place would be social media to start there, and with the Help for HD Live social media pages to find me and see what's going on.
I encourage you to listen. We'll put some of those links in our notes from the YouTube page here and in our Podbean, and I think it's on Spotify and iTunes. So find us for this podcast there. Find other episodes. Please subscribe to both podcasts and give us a review and like, so that we'll get more attention on those platforms, because those reviews don't cost you anything to do, but they help us move up in terms of rankings and being seen. Our website is alsmidatlantic.org, and that's how you can find us on online, on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all sorts of things. So thank you so much, Lauren. I learned a lot about HD, and most importantly, I learned a lot about you, and I hope that people will join to support medical research in general. Visit either of us to learn more how you can get involved, and we're going to work on tackling these diseases together.
Thank you so much.